Episode 230, Chapter 9 of Dracula. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 230, Mowage. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by Knit Circus, the online magazine featuring 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can find out more by visiting www.knitcircus.com. Also, knittingrose.net, selling fingering weight yarn, both superwash and buffalo fibers. All yarn can be dyed to order. The yarn is only available on the website and at fiber shows. Visit knittingrose.net. And Cool for Cats, the new novel by Andrew C. Ordover. You can get it at amazon.com or find out more from the link in the show notes. Well, hello. I'm releasing this podcast just a wee bit early in the week because A, it's a kickin' chapter, and B, there was something I forgot to tell you last week that I needed to get out to you early this week because there's a deadline attached. The really neat thing is this. If you are interested in knit or crochet design, there is a new book coming out. It is all centering around a topic near and dear to all of our hearts, librarians. Yes, this genius book is calling for submissions, and I will read you a little bit. It says, the book, tentatively titled Stitching in the Stacks, will be the first knitting book to pay homage to librarians and their craft. From buttoned-up blazers and tweed skirts to things a saucy librarian might wear underneath, this collection of hand-knitted patterns will include pretty and practical clothing and accessories for men and women, tributes to fictional and historical librarians, home and office objects, even a children's department for future librarians. The designs will be predominantly knitwear, but she is open to some crochet patterns as well. There is a storyboard and proposed chapter contents, and you can email your submissions to Sarah with an H, Sarah, at ropeknits, ropeknits.com. I have put a link to this call for submissions page into the show notes at craftlit.com, so you can follow that link easily to get to her call for submissions. It is such a great idea, and she has already collected such interesting things. I can't believe I forgot to say it last week, and I'm really apologetic about that. I suggest you go and look at her call for submissions site, and even if you have an inkling of an idea, email her with what you've got and start a conversation. Sarah is marvelous, and near and dear to my heart, she has chosen to pay her designers similarly to the way that we are paying our designers with the What Would Madame Defarge Knit series. And that makes me both proud and happy to see designers actually getting compensated for the hard work that they do. I also had to let you know about this now because the deadline for submissions is Friday the 11th, which is 11/11/11, which, as you may or may not know, is Nigel Tufnell Day. And if you don't know who Nigel Tufnell is, I have 2 words for you. Spinal Tap. You must see this movie. If you haven't seen this movie, someone has really fallen down on their job and neglected your education, because Spinal Tap is where so many good jokes and really wonderful lines from movies begin. And Nigel Tufnell and the number 11 both go back to that. Also, a couple other little tidbits. There are 2 Charles Dickens biographies that are coming out that were reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. Fascinating stuff. There's so much stuff about that man that I simply did not know, and new things that are being uncovered, kind of like the Bram Stoker's journals being uncovered, and all of a sudden people are going, oh, look at that, look at this influence, look at what happened there. Dickens was much more of a, I don't want to be pejorative and say Jekyll and Hyde figure, But, he wrestled with his demons. He was not all sweetness and light, which, we probably all knew, right? Because who is really 100% goodness and light? Except you. CraftLit listeners appeared to be 100% goodness and light. But everyone else, you know what I mean. They all have their rough days. We don't, of course. We're all better. But the Charles Dickens biographies looked very interesting, and I will link to both of those from the show notes as well. And listener Juliana sent in a really cool grown-up toy. It's an Edward Gorey Dracula cardboard theater. So I have linked to that on Amazon. Plus, she also sent in a YouTube video, which I have linked to, and a page at Abe Books where they did a little montage of all of these different covers of Dracula, which includes one with the much maligned and ever ignored white mustache, which is described in the book the first time Harker sees Dracula in his castle, but then ignored after that. And Juliana's comment, it's the same as mine, actually, which is you think about beings that feed on other beings. You think of like carrion birds and vultures and things like that have the very clean, featherless, hairless heads because you don't want hair getting in the way of your dinner. Kind of like how my dad would joke that when food would get in his beard, it was called, the next meal if it was breakfast. The remnants in his beard would be lunch. Yeah, that's a fun conversation to have. But it's true. You kind of, Bela Lugosi is clean shaven and it's kind of stuck for a reason. Perhaps it was that Dracula at that point in time in the castle, he was almost fasting. He didn't really seem to be doing a whole lot of eating at the time. But it's kind of hard to plot Dracula's eating needs in this book. And it's going to come up again and again as we go on. But before we get to our chapters for today, I just wanted to remind you the incentive for this month, the month of November 2011, if you donate to the podcast, you'll be put into a drawing for the book Vampires, Werewolves, and Zombies, and a skein of yarn from Amy. Beautiful yarn, enough to knit a Wilhelmina shawlette. And so those are the two incentive gifts that we're offering. Plus, as long as they hold out, you can get a Madame Defarge wristband as well. And thank you again, all of you who have donated over the last month. You've made life a lot easier around here and have managed to keep CraftLit going for some time to come. So thank you, and thank you. Now, to Dracula. Well, I couldn't very well bring the chicken back, could I? Not right away. Or the rooster. There may be other sound effects that pop back up again. I'm not exactly ruling it out. But this week's chapter is awesome. We get all sorts of stuff happening all at once, and it just kind of dog piles or wolf piles all on top of each other. And a couple things for you to know heading in. Lots of stuff for me to talk about on the flip side. First off, file this away for future reference. Mina does not exactly take the easy route in her travels. She will be traveling. I am not telling you where, but she will be traveling and she does not take the easy route. This, I think, says a lot about Mina. And it's just something for you to file away for future reference later on. And the last thing I wanted to mention before heading into the chapters themselves, or the chapter itself, is this. There has been much paper and ink spent trying to follow the dates in Dracula. And just live with the fact that it doesn't work out perfectly. It's not going to work out perfectly if you try and compare the dates to a moon calendar any more than it is going to work out perfectly if you start overlapping the dates and looking at who said they saw what when. Just allow the story to go with the flow. The dates are close enough, and Bram Stoker did enough of a good job to be able to build the important pieces, like Jonathan arrived in Dracula's castle around May 5th, around my birthday. And what a happy day that must have been for him. And then we know that he was stuck there for a really, really long time. We know that Mina's letter that she received from Sister Agatha in last week's chapters was written on the 12th of August. And they'd had Jonathan in their care for a little while at that point, 6 weeks. So you figure Jonathan got to them around the 1st of July. That means he was basically dealing with Dracula for 2 full months. Now, even if the dates aren't exact, it doesn't really matter. What matters is, oh my Lorioski, Jonathan was stuck there for that long. And it took him a long time to get to the Sisters of Mercy, and it's taken them 6 weeks just to get out of him the name of someone that they could write to come and recover him. And that's really all that matters. The stuff that Stoker did that was careful research was stuff like Whitby and the locations in and around London. Now, he doesn't name everywhere. Lucy Westenra's family's home near London is most likely near Hampstead Heath. And this becomes important, as you might imagine, those of you who know your London, because Highgate Cemetery is right there too. And that, of course, is something that you might expect would become important in a book like Dracula. Other things that he gets really right, if you went and looked into the Baedeker's books from the travel guides for London from the 1890s, you would find that the hotels that he has Arthur Holmwood stay in were hotels that normally catered to royalty and nobility, and the hotels that he has Van Helsing head towards often catered to travelers from the continent. So, there are those kinds of things that Stoker really clearly put his time and effort into, and then other things that are really quite complicated that I think he probably just bailed on and said, you know what? It's been 6 weeks. Harker's been in bad shape for 6 weeks. Good enough. So we are following them through late spring, summer, and now we're moving into the fall. Ooh, isn't that interesting? Dracula shows up and starts getting creepy right around the fall. See, I think that that's really the only thing that matters here, is that the mood that is implied by the time of year when these letters are going back and forth or these journal entries are being written, I think that's what's really important. So with that in mind, I am going to send you into a lot of writing back and forth in Chapter 9 of Dracula. We begin with a letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra.
Budapest, 24th August. My dearest Lucy, I know you'll be anxious to hear all that has happened since we parted at the railway station at Whitby. Well, my dear, I got to Hull all right, and caught the boat to Hamburg, and then the train on here. I feel that I can hardly recall anything of the journey, except that I knew I was coming to Jonathan, and that as I should have to do some nursing, I had better get all the sleep I could. I found my dear one, oh, so thin and pale and weak-looking. All the resolution has gone out of his dear eyes, and that quiet dignity which I told you was in his face has vanished. He is only a wreck of himself, and he does not remember anything that has happened to him for a long time past. At least he wants me to believe so, and I shall never ask. He has had some terrible shock, and I fear it might tax his poor brain if he were to try to recall it. Sister Agatha, who is a good creature and a born nurse, tells me that he wanted her to tell me what they were, but she would only cross herself, and say she would never tell, that the ravings of the sick were the secrets of God, and that if a nurse through her vocation should hear them, She should respect her trust. She is a sweet, good soul, and the next day when she saw I was troubled, she opened up on the subject my poor dear raved about, added, "I can tell you this much, my dear, that it was not about anything which he has done wrong himself, and you, as his wife-to-be, have no cause to be concerned. He has not forgotten you, or what he owes to you. His fear was of great and terrible things which no mortal can treat of." I do believe the dear soul thought I might be jealous, lest my poor dear should have fallen in love with another girl. The idea of my being jealous about Jonathan! And yet, my dear, let me whisper, I felt a thrill of joy through me when I knew that no other woman was a cause for trouble. I am now sitting by his bedside, where I can see his face while he sleeps. He is waking. When he woke, he asked me for his coat, as he wanted to get something from the pocket. I asked Sister Agatha, and she brought all his things. I saw amongst them was his notebook, and was going to ask him to let me look at it, for I knew that I might find some clue to his trouble, but I suppose he must have seen my wish in my eyes, for he sent me over to the window, saying he wanted to be quite alone for a moment. Then he called me back, and he said to me very solemnly, "Wilhelmina." I knew then that he was in deadly earnest, for he has never called me by that name since he asked me to marry him. "You know, dear, my ideas of the trust between husband and wife. There should be no secret, no concealment. I have had a great shock, and when I try to think of what it is, I feel my head spin round, and I do not know if it was real, or the dreaming of a madman. You know I had brain fever, and that is to be mad. The secret is here, and I do not want to know it. I want to take up my life here with our marriage. For, my dear, we had decided to be married as soon as the formalities are complete. Are you willing, Wilhelmina, to share my ignorance? Here is the book. Take it and keep it. Read it if you will, but never let me know, unless indeed some solemn duty should come upon me to go back to the bitter hours, asleep or awake, sane or mad, recorded here. He fell back exhausted, and I put the book under his pillow, and kissed him. I have asked Sister Agatha to beg the Superior to let our wedding be this afternoon, and am waiting her reply. She has come and told me that the chaplain of the English Mission Church has been sent for. We are to be married in an hour, or as soon after as Jonathan awakes. Lucy, the time has come and gone. I feel very solemn, but very, very happy. Jonathan woke a little after the hour, and was all ready, and he sat up in bed, propped up with pillows. He answered his "I will" firmly and strong. I could hardly speak. My heart was so full that even those words seemed to choke me. The dear sisters were so kind. Please God, I shall never, never forget them, nor the grave and sweet responsibilities I have taken upon me. I must tell you of my wedding present. When the chaplain and the sisters had left me alone with my husband, oh, Lucy, it is the first time I have written the words, "my husband." Left me alone with my husband, I took the book from under his pillow, and wrapped it up in white paper, and tied it with a little bit of pale blue ribbon which was around my neck, and sealed it over the knot with sealing wax, and for my seal I used my wedding ring. Then I kissed it and showed it to my husband, and told him that I would keep it so, and then it would be an outward and visible sign for us all our lives that we trusted each other, that I would never open it unless it was for his own dear sake, or for the sake of some stern duty. Then he took my hand in his, and oh, Lucy, it was the first time he took his wife's hand, and said that it was the dearest thing in all the wide world, and that he would go through all the past again to win it if need be. The poor dear meant to have said a part of the past, but he cannot think of time yet, and I shall not wonder if at first he mixes up not only the month, but the year. Well, my dear, what could I say? I could only tell him that I was the happiest woman in all the wide world, and that I had nothing to give him except myself, my life, and my trust, and that with these went my love and duty for all the days of my life. And, my dear, when he kissed me, and drew me to him with his poor weak hands, it seemed like a solemn pledge between us. Lucy, dear, do you know why I tell you all this? It is not only because it is all sweet to me, but because you have been, and are, very dear to me. It was my privilege to be your friend and guide when you came from the schoolroom to prepare for the world of life. I want you to see now, and with the eyes of a very happy wife, whither duty has led me, so that in your own married life you too may be all happy, as I am. My dear, please Almighty God, Your life may be all it promises, a long day of sunshine, with no harsh wind, no forgetting duty, no distrust. I must not wish you no pain, for that can never be, but I do hope you'll be always as happy as I am now. Good-bye, my dear. I shall post this at once, and perhaps write to you very soon again. I must stop, for Jonathan is waking. I must attend my husband. Your ever-loving Mina Harker.
Letter from Lucy Westenra to Mina Harker.
Whitby, 30th of August. My dearest Mina, oceans of love and millions of kisses, and may you soon be in your own home with your husband. I wish you were coming home soon enough to stay with us here. The strong air would soon restore Jonathan. It has quite restored me. I have an appetite like a cormorant, am full of life, and sleep well. You will be glad to know that I have quite given up walking in my sleep. I think I have not stirred out of my bed for a week, that is, when I once got into it at night. Arthur says I am getting fat. By the way, I forgot to tell you that Arthur is here. We have such walks and drives and rides and rowing and tennis and fishing together, and I love him more than ever. He tells me that he loves me more, but I doubt that, for at first he told me that he couldn't love me more than he did then. But this is nonsense. There he is calling to me, so no more just at present from your loving Lucy. P.S. Mother sends her love. She seems better, poor dear. P.P.S. We are to be married on the 28th of September.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 20 August.
The case of Renfield grows even more interesting. He has now so far quieted that there are spells of cessation from his passion. For the first week after his attack, he was perpetually violent. Then, one night, just as the moon rose, he grew quiet and kept murmuring to himself, "Now I can wait. Now I can wait." The attendant came to tell me, so I ran down at once to have a look at him. He was still in the strait waistcoat and in the padded room, but the suffused look had gone from his face, and his eyes had something of their old pleading, I might almost say cringing, softness. I was satisfied with his present condition and directed him to be relieved. The attendants hesitated, but finally carried out my wishes without protest. It was a strange thing that the patient had humor enough to see their distrust, for, coming close to me, he said in a whisper, all the while looking furtively at them, "They think I could hurt you. Fancy me hurting you, the fools." It was soothing, somehow, to the feelings to find myself disassociated even in the mind of this poor madman from the others, but all the same, I do not follow his thought. Am I to take it that I have anything in common with him, so that we are, as it were, to stand together? Or has he to gain from me some good so stupendous that my well-being is needful to him? I must find out later on. Tonight he will not speak. Even the offer of a kitten or even a full-grown cat will not tempt him. He will only say, "I don't take any stock in cats. I have more to think of now, and I can wait. I can wait." After a while I left him. The attendant tells me that he was quiet until just before dawn, and that then he began to get uneasy and at length violent, until at last he fell into a paroxysm which exhausted him so that he swooned into a sort of coma. 3 nights as the same thing happened, violent all day, then quiet from moonrise to sunrise. I wish I could get some clues to the cause. It would almost seem as if there were some influence which came and went. Happy thought. We shall tonight play sane wits against mad ones. He escaped before without our help. Tonight he shall escape with it. We shall give him a chance, and have the men ready to follow him in case they are required. 23 August. The expected always happens. How well Disraeli knew life. Our bird, when he found the cage open, would not fly, so all our subtle arrangements were for naught. At any rate, we have proven one thing, that the spells of quietness last a reasonable time. We shall in future be able to ease his bonds for a few hours each day. I have given orders to the night attendant merely to shut him in the padded room when once he is quiet until the hour before sunrise. The poor soul's body will enjoy the relief even if his mind cannot appreciate it. Hark, the unexpected again. I'm called. The patient has once more escaped. Later, another night adventure. Renfield artfully waited until the attendant was entering the room to inspect. Then he dashed out past him and flew down the passage. I sent word for the attendants to follow. Again, he went into the grounds of the deserted house, and we found him in the same place, pressed against the old chapel door. When he saw me, he became furious, and had not the attendant seized him in time, he would have tried to kill me. As we were holding him, a strange thing happened. He suddenly redoubled his efforts, and then as suddenly grew calm. I looked around instinctively, but could see nothing. Then I caught the patient's eye and followed it, but could trace nothing as it looked into the moonlit sky, except a big bat, which was flapping its silent and ghostly way to the west. Bats usually wheel about, but this one seemed to go straight on, as if it knew where it was bound for, or had some intention of its own. The patient grew calmer every instant, and presently said, "You needn't tie me. I shall go quietly." Without trouble, we came back to the house. I feel there is something ominous in his calm, and I shall not forget this night.
Lucy Westenra's Diary.
Hillingham, 24th of August. I must imitate Mina and keep writing things down. Then we can have long talks when we do meet. I wonder when it will be. I wish she were with me again, for I feel so unhappy. Last night I seemed to be dreaming again just as I was at Whitby. Perhaps it is the change of air or getting home again. It is all dark and horrid to me, for I can remember nothing. But I am full of vague fear, and I feel so weak and worn out. When Arthur came to lunch, he looked quite grieved when he saw me, and I hadn't the spirit to try to be cheerful. I wonder if I could sleep in Mother's room tonight. I shall make an excuse to try. 25th of August. Another bad night. Mother did not seem to take to my proposal. She seems not too well herself, and doubtless she fears to worry me. I tried to keep awake, and succeeded for a while. But when the clock struck 12 it waked me from a doze, so I must have been falling asleep. There was a sort of scratching or flapping at the window, but I did not mind it, and as I remember no more, I suppose I must have fallen asleep. More bad dreams. I wish I could remember them. This morning I am horribly weak. My face is ghastly pale, and my throat pains me. It must be something wrong with my lungs, for I don't seem to be getting air enough. I shall try to cheer up when Arthur comes, or else I know he will be miserable to see me so.
Letter, Arthur Holmwood to Dr. Seward, Albemarle Hotel, 31 August, my dear Jack. I want you to do me a favour. Lucy is ill. Well, that is, she has no special disease, but she looks awful, and she's getting worse every day. I've asked her if there's any cause. I do not dare to ask her mother, for to disturb the poor lady's mind about her daughter in her present state of health would be fatal. Mrs. Westenra has confided to me that her doom is spoken, disease of the heart, though poor Lucy does not know it yet. I am sure that there is something preying on my dear girl's mind. I am almost distracted when I think of her. To look at her gives me a pang. I told her I should ask you to see her, and though she demurred at first, I know why, old fellow, she finally consented. It will be a painful task for you, I know, old friend, but it is for her sake, and I must not hesitate to ask, or you to act. You are to come to lunch at Hillingham tomorrow, 2 o'clock, so as not to arouse any suspicion in Mrs. Westenra, and after lunch Lucy will take an opportunity of being alone with you. I shall come in for tea, and we can go away together. I am filled with anxiety, and want to consult with you alone as soon as I can after you have seen her. Do not fail. Arthur. Telegram, Arthur Holmwood to Seward, 1 September. Am summoned to see my father, who is worse. Stop. Am writing. Stop. Write me fully by tonight's post to ring. Stop. Wire me if necessary. Stop.
Letter from Dr. Seward to Arthur Holmwood, 2 September. My dear old fellow, with regard to Miss Westenra's health, I hasten to let you know at once that in my opinion there is not any functional disturbance or any malady that I know of. At the same time, I am not by any means satisfied with her appearance. She is woefully different from what she was when I saw her last. Of course, you must bear in mind that I did not have full opportunity of examination such as I should wish. Our very friendship makes a little difficulty which not even medical science or custom can bridge over. I had better tell you exactly what happened, leaving you to draw in a measure your own conclusions. I shall then say what I have done and propose doing. I found Miss Westenra in seemingly gay spirits. Her mother was present, and in a few seconds I made up my mind that she was trying all she knew to mislead her mother and prevent her from being anxious. I have no doubt she guesses, if she does not know, what need of caution there is. We lunched alone, and as we all exerted ourselves to be cheerful, we got, as some kind of reward for our labours, some real cheerfulness amongst us. Then Mrs. Westenra went to lie down, and Lucy was left with me. We went into her boudoir, and till we got there her gaiety remained, for the servants were coming and going. As soon as the door was closed, however, the mask fell from her face, and she sank down into a chair with a great sigh, and hid her eyes with her hand. When I saw that her high spirits had failed, I at once took advantage of her reaction to make a diagnosis. She said to me very sweetly, "I cannot tell you how I loathe talking about myself." I reminded her that a doctor's confidence was sacred, but that you were grievously anxious about her. She caught on to my meaning at once, and settled that matter in a word. "Tell Arthur everything you choose. I do not care for myself, but for him." So, I am quite free. I could easily see that she was somewhat bloodless, but I could not see the usual anemic signs, and by the chance I was able to test the actual quality of her blood, for in opening a window which was stiff, a cord gave way, and she cut her hand slightly with broken glass. It was a slight matter in itself, but it gave me an evident chance, and I secured a few drops of the blood and have analyzed them. The qualitative analysis give a quite normal condition, and shows, I should infer, in itself a vigorous state of health. In other physical matters, I was quite satisfied that there is no need for anxiety, but as there must be a cause somewhere, I have come to the conclusion that it must be something mental. She complains of difficulty breathing satisfactorily at times, and of heavy lethargic sleep, with dreams that frighten her, but regarding which she can remember nothing. She says that as a child she used to walk in her sleep, and that when in Whitby the habit came back, and that once she walked out in the night and went to Eastcliff, where Miss Murray found her. But she assures me that of late the habit has not returned. I am in doubt, and so have done the best thing I know of. I have written to my old friend and master, Professor von Helsing of Amsterdam, who knows as much about obscure diseases as anyone in the world. I have asked him to come over, and as you told me that all things were to be at your charge, I have mentioned to him who you are and your relations to Miss Westenra. This, my dear fellow, is in obedience to your wishes, for I am only too proud and happy to do anything I can for her. Van Helsing would, I know, do anything for me, for a personal reason. So no matter on what ground he comes, we must accept his wishes. He is a seemingly arbitrary man. This is because he knows what he is talking about better than anyone else. He is a philosopher and a metaphysician, and one of the most advanced scientists of his day, and he has, I believe, an absolutely open mind. This, with an iron nerve, a temper of the ice brook, and indomitable resolution, self-command, and toleration exalted from virtues to blessings, and the kindliest and truest heart that beats. These form his equipment for the noble work that he is doing for mankind, work both in theory and practice, for his views are as wide as his all-embracing sympathy. I tell you these facts that you may know why I have such confidence in him. I have asked him to come at once. I shall see Miss Westenra tomorrow again. She is to meet me at the stores, so that I may not alarm her mother by too early a repetition of my call. Yours always, John Seward.
Letter. Abraham van Helsing, Doctor of Medicine, Doctor of Philosophy, Doctor of Letters, etc., etc., to Dr. Seward. September 2nd. My good friend, when I received your letter, I am already coming to you. By good fortune I can leave just at once, without wrong to any of those who have trusted me. Were fortune other, then it were bad for those who have trusted, for I come to my friend when he call me to aid those he holds dear. Tell your friend that when that time you suck from my wound so swiftly the poison of the gangrene from that knife that our other friend, too nervous, let slip, you did more for him when he wants my aids and you call for them than all his great fortune could do. But it is pleasure added to do for him, your friend, it is to you that I come. Have near at hand, and please it so arrange that we may see the young lady not too late on tomorrow, for it is likely that I may have to return here that night. But if need be, I shall come again in 3 days, and stay longer if it must. Till then goodbye, my friend John Van Helsing.
Letter, Dr. Seward to the Honourable Arthur Holmwood, 3 September. My dear Art, Van Helsing has come and gone. He came on with me to Hillingham and found that, by Lucy's direction, her mother was lunching out, so that we were alone with her. Van Helsing made a very careful examination of the patient. He is to report to me, and I shall advise you, for of course I was not present all the time. He is, I fear, much concerned, but says he must think. When I told him of our friendship, and how you trust to me in the matter, he said, "You must tell him all you think. Tell him what I think. If you can guess it, if you will. Nay, I am not jesting. This is no jest, but life and death, perhaps more." I asked what he meant by that, for he was very serious. This was when we had come back to town, and he was having a cup of tea before starting on his return to Amsterdam. He would not give me any further clue. You must not be angry with me, Art, because his very reticence means that all his brains are working for her good. He will speak plainly enough when the time comes, be sure. So I told him I would simply write an account of our visit, just as if I were doing a descriptive special article for the Daily Telegraph. He seemed not to notice, but remarked that the smuts of London were not quite so bad as they used to be when he was a student here. I am to get his report tomorrow if he can possibly make it. In any case, I am to have a letter. Well, as to the visit, Lucy was more cheerful than on the day I first saw her, and certainly looked better. She had lost something of the ghastly look that so upset you, and her breathing was normal. She was very sweet to the professor, as she always is, and tried to make him feel at ease, though I could see the poor girl was making a hard struggle for it. I believe Van Helsing saw it too, for I saw the quick look under his bushy brows that I knew of old. Then he began to chat of all things except ourselves and diseases, and with such an infinite gentility that I could see poor Lucy's pretense of animation merge into reality. Then, without any seeming change, he brought the conversation gently round to his visit and suavely said, "My dear young miss, I have the so great pleasure because you are so much beloved. That is much, my dear, even were there that which I do not see. They told me you were down in the spirits, and that you were of a ghastly pale. To them I say, poof," and he snapped his fingers at me and went on. "But you and I shall show them how wrong they are. How can he," and he pointed at me with the same look and gesture as that with which he pointed me out in his class on, or rather after, a particular occasion which he never fails to remind me of, "know anything of a young ladies. He has his madmen to play with, and to bring them back to the happiness, and to those that love them. It is much to do, and oh, but there are rewards in that we can bestow such happiness. But the young ladies, he has no wife nor daughter, and the young do not tell themselves to the young, but to the old, like me, who have known so many sorrows and the cause of them. So, my dear, we will send him away to smoke the cigarette in the garden, whilst you and I have little talk all to ourselves." I took the hint and strolled about, and presently the professor came to the window and called me in. He looked grave, but said, "I have made careful examination, but there is no functional cause. With you I agree that there has been much blood lost. It has been, but is not. But the conditions of her are in no way anemic. I have asked her to send me her maid, that I may ask just 1 or 2 questions, so that I may not chance to miss nothing. I know well what she will say, and yet there is cause. There is always cause for everything. I must go back home and think. You must send me the telegram every day, and if there be cause, I shall come again. The disease, for not to be well is a disease, interest me, and the sweet young dear, she interest me too. She charm me, and for her, if not for you or disease, I come. As I tell you, he would not say a word more, even when we were alone. And so now, Art, you know all I know. I shall keep stern watch. I trust your poor father is rallying. It must be a terrible thing to you, my dear old fellow, to be placed in such a position between two people who are both so dear to you. I know your idea of duty to your father, and you are right to stick to it. But if need be, I shall send you word to come at once to Lucy, so do not be over-anxious unless you hear from me. Dr. Seward's Diary, 4 September.
Zoophagous patient still keeps up our interest in him. He had only one outburst, and that was yesterday at an unusual time. Just before the stroke of noon, he began to grow restless. The attendant knew the symptoms and at once summoned aid. Fortunately, the men came at a run and were just in time, for at the stroke of noon he became so violent that it took all their strength to hold him. In about 5 minutes, however, he began to get more quiet and finally sank into a sort of melancholy, in which state he has remained up to now. The attendant tells me that his screams whilst in the paroxysm were really appalling. I found my hands full when I got in, attending to some of the other patients who were frightened by him. Indeed, I can quite understand the effect, for the sounds disturbed even me, though I was some distance away. It is now after the dinner hour of the asylum, and as yet my patient sits in a corner brooding, with a dull, sullen, woebegone look in his face, which seems rather to indicate than to show something directly. I cannot quite understand it. Later, another change in my patient. At 5 o'clock, I looked in on him and found him seemingly as happy and content as he used to be. He was catching flies and eating them, and was keeping note of his capture by marking nail marks on the edge of the door between the ridges of padding. When he saw me, he came over and apologized for his bad conduct and asked me in a very humble, cringing way to be led back to his own room and to have his notebook again. I thought it well to humor him, so he is back in his room with the window open. He has the sugar of his tea spread out on the windowsill and is reaping quite a harvest of flies. He is not now eating them, but putting them into a box as of old, and is already examining the corners of his room to find a spider. I tried to get him to talk about the past few days, for any clue to his thoughts would be of immense help to me, but he would not rise. For a moment or two, he looked very sad and said in a sort of faraway voice, as though saying it rather to himself than to me, "All over. All over. He has deserted me. No hope for me now unless I do it myself." And then suddenly, turning to me in a resolute way, he said, "Doctor, would you be very good to me and let me have a little more sugar? I think it would be very good for me." "And the flies?" I said. "Yes, the flies like it too, and I like the flies. Therefore I like it." And there are people who know so little as to think that madmen do not argue. I procured him a double supply, and left him as happy a man as, I suppose, any in the world. I wish I could fathom his mind. Midnight. Another change in him. I had been to see Miss Westenra, whom I found much better, and had just returned and was standing at our own gate looking at the sunset, when once more I heard him yelling. As his room is on this side of the house, I could hear it better than in the morning. It was a shock to me to turn from the wonderful smoky beauty of a sunset over London, with its lurid lights and inky shadows, and all the marvellous tints that come on foul clouds, even as on foul water, and to realize all the grim sternness of my own cold stone building, with its wealth of breathing misery, and my own desolate heart to endure it all. I reached him just as the sun was going down, and from his window saw the red disk sink. As it sank, he became less and less frenzied, and just as it dipped, he slid from the hands that held him, an inert mass on the floor. It is wonderful, however, what intellectual recuperative power lunatics have, for within a few minutes he stood up quite calmly and looked around him. I signaled to the attendant not to hold him, for I was anxious to see what he would do. He went straight over to the window and brushed out the crumbs of sugar. Then he took his fly box and emptied it outside and threw away the box. Then he shut the window and, crossing over, sat down on his bed. All this surprised me, so I asked him, "Are you going to keep flies anymore?" "No," he said. "I'm sick of all that rubbish." He certainly is a wonderfully interesting study. I wish I could get some glimpse of his mind or of the cause of his sudden passion. Stop. There may be a clue after all. If we can find why today his paroxysm came on at high noon and at sunset, can it be that there is a malign influence of the sun at periods which affects certain natures, as at times the moon does others? We shall see.
Telegram, Seward, London to Van Helsing, Amsterdam, 4 September. Patient still better today. Telegram, Seward, London to Van Helsing, Amsterdam, 5 September. Patient greatly improved. Good appetite, sleeps naturally, good spirits, color coming back. Telegram, Seward, London to Van Helsing, Amsterdam, 6 September. Terrible change for the worse. Come at once. Do not lose an hour. I hold over telegram to Holmwood till have seen you.
And now we can see why Bram Stoker is such a master when it comes to this story. I think one of the really effective things in Dracula is that we have, I'll use the word villain. It's more complicated than that. But we have a bad guy, we have a villain, we have Dracula, who is someone we do not know and someone whose motives we cannot fathom. I mean, we get the basic point that the dude needs to drink blood, but beyond that, you know, why he selects a victim, we don't know. Why did he hold Jonathan for all that time? We really don't know. We don't even know if we're going to find out answers to some of these questions. You know, this is not the Edward Jacob Bella triangle. This is not Interview with a Vampire, where you get into Louis's mind, or when you eventually get into Lestat's mind. Dracula is more, dare I say, primal than those books in many ways. And as a consequence, because we don't understand the rhythm that Dracula lives under, I mean, beyond the basic day, night, moon, dark thing, it makes him that much more unnerving. And it is interesting because when Lucy is in Whitby with Mina sharing her room, Lucy doesn't seem to be at all unnerved by her nighttime journeys. Now, of course, she's not keeping a diary then, so we really don't know. But what we do know is that by the time she gets to London, by the time she is at her family's estate, Hillingham, which is somewhere near Hampstead Heath, which is north of the city of London, north of Regent's Park, and quite a huge green space with ponds and lakes and Highgate Cemetery and all of that stuff. By the time she gets there, alone with her mother in this big estate, she is afraid. Or at the very least, she is uneasy about things that are going on. And it seems as though Dracula stopped visiting her for a while. So, and you know, we don't have an explanation. Maybe he was busy. We don't know. Maybe the man had some papers he needed to file. We have no idea. But that's, I think, part of what makes all of this very unnerving. And remember, if you put yourself into the mindset of somebody who is reading this book, never having seen a Dracula movie, never having seen Twilight or Interview with the Vampire, or any of the other myriad Dracula vampire versions that are out there, at this point in the story, up until that very last telegram, we may well think that Dracula has gone off to focus on someone else or something else. We don't really understand what he's triangulating, what he's setting up or planning. And for those of us who have only seen Dracula movies, we still are quite in the dark about what he's setting up at this point. So I would say for those of you who haven't watched any accurate-ish Dracula movies, don't. Just hold off. Wait a while. And for those of you who do know your Dracula, it gives you that opportunity to be kind of Brechtian about the whole thing and really watch the setup for how all of the pieces get put into place to allow the climax to build. A couple of other things. Well, now you know why I called the episode Marriage, because Mina and Jonathan do in fact get married, and good old Mina, trooped all the way to Budapest. Of course, she really secretly had wanted to travel anyway, so I don't think it was that big a hardship on her emotionally. As far as the traveling went, of course, it was very stressful not knowing if Jonathan was okay or 100% or had been physically hurt. She didn't really know for real what was going on until she got there. And for those of you who have not gotten married yet, I know it would be very easy if I put myself back in my state of mind before I got married. It'd be very easy to think that Mina was just being a complete ninny when she was writing to Lucy and saying, I just wrote my husband and I have to go wait on my husband and stuff like that. No, I think the first 48 hours after we got married, I kept testing out the word husband and the word wife and kind of, getting used to it and giggling a lot and thinking it was pretty funny. It was also pretty weird, because especially if you have lived with the person who you are marrying, you will think, well, marriage, it's really just a piece of paper and it doesn't matter. And but no, actually it matters. And it just matters. No matter who is marrying whom or what kind of an arrangement you've made, coming up with some legal document that says that you are legally attached to someone else till death do you part for the rest of your life, that does kind of change things. You think it won't. You can be snide and cynical, and that's fine. I know I was. But it changes things. And so Mina's giddiness there, she's really not being a ninny. That's really just kind of what it is. And I actually thought it was one of Stoker's nice touches at writing a woman at a time when, as we've noticed, it takes a really interesting and quite good writer to write women well. We've seen Marion and even Laura. And, you compare that with Lucy Manette, who is kind of a cardboard cutout. And needs to be. I mean, that's no offense to Dickens, because then you look at some of the other women that he's written, and they're really quite wonderful. Anyway, I think Stoker did a nice job. And of course, Lucy has a marriage that's coming up to Arthur Holmwood. She picked the rich guy. I know. There is always the part of me that wishes that she had married Quincy Morris, because that would make her kind of like Hugh Grant's roommate in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, the little redhead who marries the big Texan. Hey, big Texan. There's always that part of me, but Lucy makes the smart choice. She's going to marry a man with a title and an income, and not marry John Seward. Now, Seward is someone who we get to know better than probably anyone else in the book. And as you've already noticed, his narrative is becoming one of the dominant ones. And yet, it is kind of easy to start to get frustrated with Dr. Seward for a couple of reasons. One, he doesn't seem like much of a doctor. And 2, occasionally he seems pretty darn dense. And I'm not entirely sure how to parse this. My feeling is, these kind of procedural dramas that we have today, CSI and all of these things that really Sherlock Holmes and before that Wilkie Collins really started. Before those were as ubiquitous as they are now, it wouldn't have been that important to have a whole lot of veracity writing on the part of a medical man. Bram Stoker didn't really have to go and shadow a doctor or a madhouse doctor to create the character of Dr. Seward. And that certainly shows. I mean, it is hard to imagine, even putting yourself back in time, that he really wouldn't have been able to figure out what the rhythms were that Renfield was suffering through or living within. You know, his different reactions to light and dark, to sunshine and nighttime. And it's that kind of stuff is probably going to continue for a while. But I just kind of chalk it up to that wasn't the important part. Stoker really did not feel the weight of needing to have an accurate medical doctor. He needed Seward for a number of reasons, which will become clearer and clearer the further we go along. And one of those reasons is because Seward had to trust and to bring in to everyone else in a trustworthy way the character of Dr. Van Helsing. And so finally we have met Van Helsing, who, if you have seen the Winona Ryder version of Dracula, which is arguably the best cast, but the most overwrought and overly dramatic, Anthony Hopkins plays Van Helsing, and he's marvelous. I mean, the whole movie just perks up as soon as he walks onto the screen. And you can kind of see why. It's almost an unfair comparison. Van Helsing is a very interesting character. He speaks in almost garbled English. His Germanicisms, he's Dutch, but the structure of his grammar is allegedly Germanic, which is kind of Bram Stoker's version of German grammar. So it's a mess. And I will tell you, my brother-in-law is reading Van Helsing for us because he is actually German. And he was so frustrated with Van Helsing's grammar because, of course, he's German. He speaks German. He knows Dutch people. He learned English young, and he learned English correctly. And so for him, as a German man, to read Stoker's version of Van Helsing's butchery of the English language based on a Germanic sentence construction, it is driving him nuts. But I think he does a marvelous job, and he has a beautiful voice. And so I am very happy to be able to present him to you as our Van Helsing. Interestingly, and perhaps because it was difficult to write Van Helsing in that kind of butchered Germanic English, most of Van Helsing's narrative is not actually carried by his own voice. We rarely hear Van Helsing speaking himself. Usually, we hear him coming through in the texts written by Dr. Seward. So, I think that's it for this week. I am going to get this out to you quickly so that you can get your ideas for the Library Knits book to Sarah at ropeknits.com, and so that you can have a great week. I have a very busy week coming up, so I wanted to get this out for Sarah, but also get this out for my own sanity so that I could get on with the next round of goodness. Have a great week. I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye. Please remember to support the people who support CraftLit. Visit Knit Circus online magazine, offering 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can check out the latest issue at www.knitcircus.com. And Knitting Rose Yarns. You can see all the gorgeousness available for you at knittingrose.net. And What Would Madame Defarge Knit? A new book of knit and crochet patterns coming to you from the CraftLit family. And please visit the blogs and sites of CraftLit supporters. Those links can be found in the sidebar of the show notes. The show notes can be found at craftlit.com. CraftLit can also be accessed by its own Android and iPhone application. You can purchase it at the iPhone or iTouch application store, or you can subscribe free at iTunes. CraftLit is made possible by the generous support of its listeners. and for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.